Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you are joining us from, welcome. Welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival's weekend of conversations about reparations, claiming what is rightfully ours, 185,435 days late and 3 billion short. The Black Consciousness Festival is a global online platform for the commemoration, celebration, and sharing of vital histories and stories that boost the awareness and impact of the pride, power, and practice of people of African descent. Our inaugural year was the magical and historical 2020, where we curated a month of conversations and activities around topics of Black consciousness. Earlier in 2021, we had our Youth Festival and now our weekend of conversations on reparations. The Black Consciousness Festival is continuing the building of awareness around how each of us can take the necessary steps for restitution, healing, and repair. You can find more on the festival at our website, theblackconsciousness.com. My name is Anderson Gonçalves, and part of the BCF team, I am humbled to introduce today's third conversation. Today, we present a conversation entitled Full Admission with Dignity, a conversation about the Brazilian context and movements for reparations. This conversation will be led by Alabê Nunjara. Born in Rio and currently living in Bahia, Alabê plays the harp and clarinet, sang in operas and choirs, was an athlete, played capoeira, fought and played the drums in samba schools. He served in the Army and the Navy, studied mathematics at the Federal University Fluminense, and has a master's degree in political science from the Federal University of the State of the Rio de Janeiro, UNIRIO. He also has a bachelor's degree in international relations from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and also started studying for his master's in international relations at the Federal University of Bahia, UFBA. He has done research on Africa, defense, and foreign policy. He did a study exchange in the Caribbean, interned at the UN and the French Embassy, organized a movement for action toward racial affirmations and quotas at UFRJ, and was the coordinator in a national movement for student assistance and housing. He's currently part of the foundation's Talent Bridge program, Lemann, Opportunity US to pursue graduate studies in the United States of America, and is a Diplomacy Award Fellow from the Affirmative Action Programme of the Rio Branco Institute. We thank you for joining or tuning in on our Zoom webinar or live Facebook stream. Feel free to post anything you hear that touches you and make sure to tag us on Facebook and Instagram. Enjoy.
Muito obrigado por essa introdução. Eu estarei aqui mediando nesse Black Consciousness Festival. Vou estar mediando a professora Marisa, né? E o Eustáquio.
And Eustáquio, I'm going to introduce them to you guys. I'm going to speak in Portuguese, and whoever wants to listen to in English, you just need to choose the option. There's a little bar where you can choose the option for English. In the menu, you're gonna choose the translation into English. Marise Conceição de Jesus is a history teacher in various grades in Rio de Janeiro and another city close by to Rio. She's right now studying in her doctorate by PPAJA S, University in Rio de Janeiro. It's a master's at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, studying about racial contest. Also a specialist in history from the University of Fluminense. She's also a bachelor's in history and one of the coordinators in Rio. She was a counselor of Comedy, which is the council of defense of Black people. She was part of a state company to protect Black people, and she's also run lots of programs to implement laws to defend Black people around Brazil, not only Rio. Trying to make some laws to educate people about Black history. That's Marizi. And I'm also going to introduce Astaki Lawa, or how people call, he prefers to be called Ostacolawa, but he was born in Ponte Nova in Minas Gerais. He is an engineer, electrical engineer by the University of Minas Gerais, and a psychologist from the University of Rio. He worked from 1970 to until 1990, and in 1995 he did his master's and a specialization in politics. And he started working in public service until he retired. He's also an activist in the Black movement and part of the group Negricia and right now he is a counselor of Black people in a company that defends reparations for Black people and people that were enslaved. After this brief introduction about the background of each one of them, we're going to have a conversation here. We'll be open to both of you and all of you in any social media. You guys can send questions and any, so Stack and Marisa can answer your questions. We're going to be talking about, this event is going to be talking about the case, it's about talking about reparations in Brazil. It talks about us giving an idea, a panoramic idea about how things go about when we talk about reparations in Brazil and the political and social aspect of it. I'm going to start opening by letting Maurizi and Ostaco to talk about, and then after that, I will be introducing little topics here and there, and to try to direct the conversation in the historic, social, and economical factor about this topic. So we can start being able to make a comparing the Brazilian movement with the things that happen in the Caribbean. I'll leave the word now to Marisa or to Estáquio, whichever one wants to start first. I will leave my word to Marisa. So we're going to let Ostáquio start, and then Marisa is going to comment on it. Okay? Can we start? All right. To start with, I would like to... Hello?
Posso falar?
Can I speak? Yeah. At first, I would like to send a message to all our brothers and sisters here, and the purposes of Pan-African Universal, the people who were born in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago, George Padmore, Sylvester Williams, M. Westwood, Emily Estwood Garden, Claudia Jonas, and in between lots of other activists that will be with us during this conversation. Brazil is a nation, a multicultural nation, where the states don't reflect that diversity. This country, who are made of white, blacks, and Native Americans, the power in Brazil are traditionally in the hands of white people, descendants of immigrants, or people that see themselves as white people. As a result of this, the majority of people in Brazil that are responsible of the cultural and artistic culture of Brazil are unable to exploit the results of their work. This reality needs to change. In the last 45 years, the Black movement in Brazil, mostly located geographically and culturally, have been using their knowledge to be able to elaborate politically and to be able to influence people politically with representatives, Black and Native American representatives, so that every Brazilian people can actually live in a multicultural Brazil. People in Brazil that have been there's been a problem here. 1 second.
Oi?
I think
ficou sem som? Você parou de falar? Não está conseguindo ouvir?
Não, não parei de falar. Parece que caiu alguma coisa aqui no meu sistema.
Onde estou?
Mas...
Parece que nada aconteceu.
Para mim também. Eu estou te ouvindo bem, estou te vendo bem.
Mas minha imagem não aparece.
Eu estou vendo sua
Não, para
imagem
mim
também.
sim.
A imagem aparece aí?
Aparece a imagem e sua voz.
Não, então vamos continuar. Tá
Okay,
certo?
let's continue then. An essential part of this political problem is the fight of the right place of red Indians and Black people that have lost their lands here in Brazil. They looked for reparations based in the ONU reparation in Durban in 2001.
Alô?
Okay.
Está aqui? Acho que teve problema.
Hello, I think he had a problem because we can't hear him right now.
Vocês estão aí? Alguém está me ouvindo?
Eu estou te
Anyone
ouvindo.
hearing me?
Para mim está tudo normal.
I can hear you. I can hear everything well. I think Ostaki is the one who lost the connection, but I can hear it properly.
No mais, pra mim tá tudo normal.
Pra mim também tá normal.
Everything is normal for me.
Parou de falar.
I think.
Você não tá vendo mais a imagem dele.
I think he disconnected.
Mas aparece aqui o Eustáquio, como se ele tivesse.
Vamos fazer uma inversão, a gente continua com...
Let's continue with you, and then when you can join us again, we will continue. To start my talk, I would like to thank everyone for this, for the opportunity to be talking to you guys. It's this festival of Black Consciousness, and I'm really happy to be able to be speaking about you guys and to learn more about this job, this initiative. It's important. The closer we are, the more we learn about these questions, the better it is for us. So I'd like to thank Sean for this moment. I would like to thank Alabê to be here with us, and we'd like to thank the interpreters as well. I'd like to thank everyone involved in this event. It's an event of lots of importance. It's important for us to be able to share these interactions, to share our history, and try to understand why we need reparations, about the fact of the Europeans and what they did, why this reparation is needed. We're taught, and within this contest, we talked about me talking about the sixth item in the UNIRIO, which is talking about the eradication of illiteracy. You know? So we'll talk a few. I'll bring a few data about Brazil in terms of alphabetization, and from there we're going to lead the conversation to other things. CARICON has 10 points of reparation, and she's going to talk about the sixth point, which talks about the end of illiteracy here in Brazil. CARICON has 10 principles, and they this curriculum wants the repatriation of Africa, a program of development to the Red Indians, you know, cultural institutions that are better equipped and people to be able to solve the problems, the social problems in health, and the sixth point is the education and illiteracy within Africans and Red Indians, and also a better education about the history of Black people and Red Indians here. And something that doesn't exist yet, and a program of rehabilitation, psychological rehabilitation. The Frazon has always spoke about the psychological problems of living in a place of colonization, post-colonization. We have a weaker understanding of the technological access here, and we're going to talk about here how it is here in Brazil and in the Caribbean. And the cancellation of debt from countries. And she's going to talk about the education, the sixth item. I think that education, when we read the 10 plans of action of CARICOM about the project of reparations, there isn't a way to separate it from education itself, because education is very well placed in every single one of those points, those plans of action of CARICOM. I see that education as a basis to all of this process, you know. I'm going to choose the sixth item about literacy and alphabetization, because this process of reading and writing in this world, it's very important for all of this process of fighting that we've been doing historically, and that is have been growing through the years in every single place in the world. The Black population have been rising up, you know. So Stack talks a little bit about this panorama, and I would like really to talk about the education aspect, because it's a place where I can actually influence. And because I believe that education is the basis of all of these points of action, like the points of action that Alabê just spoke about. And because that we understand that education as an instrument of power and of domination. In our case, it's a process of appropriation that is going to help the Black population in this process of equality, you know? Not a domination, because it's not our objective, but in the aspect of understanding, of comprehending this process and our fight. Well, education in Brazil, it's seen as a universal right here in Brazil. However, there is a bit of irregularity in the educational system here, because the education of quality, like it should be for everyone, it's actually only for a small percentage of the population. So historically, the population in Brazil, the Black population in Brazil, has been fighting. It's been fighting to have access to have quality education, to have the right to have quality education. This has been a fight that Black people in Brazil have been started since the dictatorship. We have research that show us that since slavery, Black people have not had access to education, to the quality education. It's always been a fight for Black Brazilians to be able to get proper education. They've always had to work way harder, look for different mechanisms in order to have the right to have a proper education within their society, especially in that time of slavery. since then, the fight for education, for the right to have proper education, it's always been vivid in the history of Black people in Brazil.
Posso dar uma palavrinha sobre essa?
Can I speak a little bit about this inequality, historical inequality? For us to try to keep this dialogue alive. I've been thinking about lots of things while we were talking, and we are in 2021, and next year, in 2022, we're going to be 200 years old of independence. So that's a long time. That 200 years is a long time. That's at least 8 generations, right? That's 8 generations. If we put in perspective of 25 years every generation. So let's talk about how Black people in Brazil were back then, you know. Just to remind you guys that when Brazil got independence was a moment that was decided. What was in Haiti had just gotten their independence, you know, 15 years before ours, by fighting with João Zaque de Samir in 804, and that was making our elites really worried, and the elites united and decided to do this. Let's give them independence, but not resolve slavery. Back then, the British was changing their idea, the way they run things. You know, they started abolition of slavery, of course, and Britain tried to make Portugal to abolish slavery. And when they tried to do that, Brazil made a law that people call in Brazil law Lei para Inglês Ver. It's like a law that people create in Brazil that is just for people to see that that law exists. It's not actually put in practice. And this law actually made it rise the amount of slavery in Brazil. And that was all illegally, because in theory in Brazil had abolished slavery, but in reality they actually increased the number of slaves and African people being imported as slaves into Brazil. People here Black people here didn't have access to school. They didn't have. They couldn't vote. They didn't have access to health. Lots of boats, slavery boats, came. And there was something that used to happen because it was illegal, that people would sink the ships. The thing is that the ships were full of people, full of slavers, and lots of slaves lost their lives due to this. And when they came here and the slaves actually were free, they didn't have access to education, you know. So it's been an inequality that happened since the times of slavery. It's a huge inequality. Here, slavery was until 1894, officially, right? But there was still slavery happening in the 30s, in the 20s. Lots of people were still found to be slaves, you know. Even today, you can still find some cases of people that are being treated as slaves or actually being working as slaves, you know. In the 30s, with Getúlio Vargas, is that people actually started making laws about these aspects, you know. In the 30s, my grandmother was already alive, you know. My grandfather too. They had, okay, they were young, they were 6, 7, but only then that Black people started to have access to education. When my grandfather had 6, 7 years. And this integration was slow. It's something really hard. But who are we going to blame? Portugal? Are we going to blame the British? Are we going to we needed to actually speak to those leaders, you know. But in reality, even though Black people were part of the nation, in reality we weren't. It's important for us to have a panorama, have an idea of how inequality is in Brazil. Today, we are more than 50% of the country, you know? We're almost 55% of the population. We're the majority, you know? 110 million Black people, you know? No one has more, only Nigeria has more people, more Black people as their inhabitants. And Brazil has 110 Black people outside of Africa, you know? This is bigger than many other countries. It's a nation of Black people that are here in Brazil. And we also see, you look at all the aspects, economical, social, cultural, historical, and we are in a disadvantage. This reparation is extremely necessary. This needs to happen. In Brazil, lots of things were mixed. Mixed, whites and Blacks were mixed. It was, in many different aspects, were mixed. And things that happened not in an organized manner, and it became really hard, you know. And in Brazil, it's different than the States, where you look at the origin of people. Here, there's a variety and a very different mix of people, you know. Black people with light skin, really light skin, and Black people with different origins, you know. And it's important for people to understand that. Just one more element. Brazil, when it became independent, it didn't become a republic. I know that you know, but lots of people don't understand that. Brazil didn't become a republic. Actually, Brazil became a monarchy because the son of the monarch of Portugal asked for independence, and he became the monarch of Brazil, you know? And then he returned to Portugal, and his son took over Brazil. And there was a long time where monarchy was actually leaving Brazil. The old Portuguese monarchy became the Brazilian monarchy. And only after slavery was abolished that monarchy actually fell. So it is important for people to understand that, because it changed. It's really different from the other countries in Latin America. Mexico tried 2 times becoming a monarchy, and it didn't work. One by Napoleon, and the second one was tried to declare himself a monarchy, and it didn't work. But in Brazil, it worked. From 815 until 899, and then at the change of the year, the monarchy fell. Just for people to have a notion how complex is the black situation in Brazil, not only politically, but culturally as well.
Bem, então, Alabê,
Well, Alabê, it's from this context that you said
das nossas desigualdades.
that we're talking about our inequalities, you know.
E a gente,
We've got a historical of inequality
nesse
that brings us
acesso à educação,
an equality and an inability to access education, a place to live, and in every other area, social area, you know. Everything, all that stuff is integrated, and high risk of crime within the black people in Brazil.
falou sobre a questão dos seus avós,
About what you said about your
quando
grandfathers in the 30s,
passa a ter constitucionalmente acesso à educação.
when actually finally the black people started to have access to education, is very well shown in the statistics, you know. Especially when you look about alphabetization in Brazil, where you see that people during that time, black people at that time weren't. Now, for example, most people that don't have alphabetization in Brazil are between
E a diferença ela vai aumentar entre
15 years
60
and older. And that difference actually grows from people that are 60 years and older. So for example, this exactly that group that you're talking about of your grandparents and all. So when you talk about dates, like data, you know, 9% of white people in around the 60s don't know to read. That same number within the black people are 3 times bigger. And that impacts the process of education, formal education. Not only the lack of, but also it's going to impact in the education of their sons and their grandfathers within this social group. Especially because we're going to debate about cultural, when we talk about sons and grandfathers of these people that are over 60, that don't have alphabetization, is going to impact directly in the construction, in the building of the education of these descendants, you know, which only makes it grow the inequality between black people and white people in Brazil. And we're talking about this reparation. We're talking about colorism, and we understand as well that this process in Brazil is very different, you know, and there's lots of things that made this thing harder, you know. Today we have a population, a black population. You spoke about how 50%, over 50% of Brazil, 55% of Brazil are black, but that's something that is very recent, you know. Before, people didn't auto-declare themselves black people here in Brazil. The society in Brazil has been learning and growing thanks to the black movements here. And it's a factor that is very important in order for us to understand how things grew here in Brazil. I'm going to accelerate here what I'm going to talk about because of the time. We here in Brazil, we come from a historical fight to have access to education. About all these aspects that you put the we speak about a lot about the how the elite Brazilian elite stole her history, historical, the culture and history of these people, not only black people but indigenous people too, was stolen by the elite. You know, lots of Red Indians, Native Americans don't know their story here. We finally managed to have an alteration in the law in Congress in 2003 with President Lula that managed to change something in the law in order to be able to and then it was changed in 2008, you know, that made it a compulsory for people to have education, historical education about their culture, Black culture and Native American culture. It was only then that it became compulsory for people to learn about their story in the school curriculum. You know? We've been talking about laws that talk about the process of an emancipation of Black people, but we need to think about how in Brazil the things about laws is very hard, because in Brazil the fact that there is a law doesn't really mean it's going to be followed. Like you said before, just because there was a law after independence that Brazil abolished slavery, didn't actually mean that slavery was actually abolished. It actually grew. So the fact that we had a law, the law of vento livre, that in theory and made emancipation of children of slavery from that date on. But the context of the law was actually very contradictory, very, but in reality, those children were not emancipated. They weren't free after the proclamation of that law. But in reality, that child was not free, was actually going to be, they had to work until 21 years old to give back, like pay back what their owners actually gave it to them, you know? So this law was very flawed. It didn't actually mean that people were free after that moment. Like there is even a popular saying here in Brazil that people say that lei para inglês ver. It means that laws here in Brazil are actually made just for it to look good, but not actually followed. Talking about what you said, it's very interesting that you said that. When you talked about the law of vento livre, people had to, they were born and then they had to work until 21 years old, working as a slave. From 1970 1970
92.
until
Essas eleições só seriam livres depois que acabou, que foi abolida oficialmente a escravidão.
so those people that actually were born in that time were only actually free after the abolition, the lei feijão of 1800 of 1891.
Como é que esses escravos, se a lei de 1831, a gente
This law on in 870,
1830 a 1870 agora. Quem é que está vivo aqui que está trabalhando? Esse cara com 20 anos de idade aí trabalhando para você. Ele está vivo, ele tá. Então você está ilegal. E aí então aí mais de 500.
What happened during that time was that people actually, after some time of this law, they made the abolition of everyone. So we need to let people know, people that are listening to us, they need to know that.
Seja bem-vindo, Tássio.
Obrigado.
Eu vou dar uma corrida aqui para concluir, para que você possa continuar.
I'm going to speed up so that you can continue the conversation afterwards. So it's important for people to know that sometimes our law in Brazil is so talked about. And people, when they hear about this law, they believe that Brazil is ideal, Brazil is talking about it, Brazil is working on it. People talk about it so much outside Brazil that people from outside thought that, wow, things in Brazil are changing, you know? They thought that in reality, Brazil was a big racially democratic, you know? And the studies actually showed that the reality was completely different than what was being talked about. And still to this day, it still shows how the racial democracy here, it has lots of inequality. So something that sometimes outside it's essential in order to change practice in Brazil. These laws don't actually change much, you know. So going back to the reparations conversation, we in Brazil have 11 million people that don't know how to read and write. Within them, Brazil, due to the fact it's a federation, it brings realities that are very different and complex. That we can't think about Brazil as a one, you know, especially when we speak about the identity, the racial identity in Brazil. We can't really think about Brazil as a whole unit. In this area, there's lots of difference. For example, in the southern area are the areas of smaller percentages of illiteracy, but in the north and the northeast have bigger percentages of illiteracy. I'm going to finish very simply. These values of illiteracy. So when we talk about how in the south it's smaller than in the north, we're also talking about how the southern area of Brazil are actually the area in Brazil that have the largest amount of white people with European descendants in Brazil. So this data is not natural, you know. And just to conclude what I'm talking about, this demand that we bring about reparations in Brazil, that we talk a lot about education, brought about lots of initiatives, historical initiatives, you know, that we came in fight of the right to be educated, and we want an education that teaches, that tells people about her story, her history, you know. It is something that we've been fighting for, and we managed to achieve that. Now it's compulsory. It's a law that in schools they have to learn about Native Americans and Black people. But just the fact that just because we have that law means that it's actually done in schools. You know, here in Brazil, it's not actually done very well. But we can talk about that later. Ostaco is going to talk now. Mauricio, what you said was very good. I'm sorry, everyone. Ostaco had a problem with his internet, but is now back. Marise spoke something that's very important, and we're going to talk about here very quickly. In Brazil, it's like this. Say your surname, and I'm going to tell you your origin. She spoke about the southern area of Brazil. Most people don't know this, but these white people that came to Brazil, that were actually descendants of Italians, Polish, German people, it's actually very recent, you know. It came at the end of the 19th century, at the end of slavery in Brazil. For example, Bolsonaro. You look at the last presidents of Brazil, Bolsonaro, Temer, and Rousseff. All of them are descendants of those immigrants. We don't have any Black people that became presidents. Even during the dictatorship, we had Medici and President Gazo. They're also descendants of German people, of European people. And the other one who was Juscelino Kubitschek. And they came here with nothing. And when slavery was over, Black people here were never in contention to become a president, you know. It's interesting how this inequality goes to every single area here in Brazil. You know, it's a symbol that is very important to be studied, for you to notice. Brazil had laws of immigration to support there was actually a law here in Brazil that was like this. In Brazil, we have this amount of Black people, so we need to bring European descendants in order to clean the race, you know? This was actually a policy, a government policy to bring white people into Brazil. When I learned about the reparation system, and I studied this, I said, this is the key for a fight. It is important for us to have a long-term process to be able to learn and work and try and fight for our reparations, you know. The importance of Eustáquio to be here. He said we need to stop with movements that have lots of gas in the beginning and then stop. We need to create a long-term movement so that people can keep on fighting 100 years from now. Are we going to only complain about the situation, or are we going to take action and have a coherent fight long term? So we can fight and see and actually put this fight in the political, in a political view, so we can actually make changes, you know, so we don't look to Africa with shame, you know, that we can look at Africa with pride. We come from Africa. We had lots of problems, but this nation is also ours. Brazil is also ours. This nation, the riches of these nations were also built by us. It's very important for us to understand that. I'm going to leave the word with Eustáquio that has more property to talk about the situation. Alabê, what you said was great. I was talking about one of the countries of Polycon, about creation of cultural institutions to remember the crimes that the colonists made. We understand that in Brazil, this is important, especially in Brazil. It's valid, but it's ambiguous because there are lots of museums, slavery museums, that show the torture items were actually used against the slaves, the killing of black people and everything. But there are also sons of owners that have pride of their past. There are people here that are actually proud of the fact that their family used to have slaves, you know. So these places in Brazil, it brings for some people hate. It also for other people are actually, it's actually something that they are proud of, you know. So it's important for us to be careful with how it's shown, you know, for not to glorify some and to demonify others. Claricon says that it is important that black people need to have access to health. Actually, in Brazil, health everyone in Brazil has access to health, but unfortunately, it's not very good health, you know. So it's actually hard for people to get access to good health in Brazil. So these are questions that we've been fighting together with the people of Caribbean, that we also haven't. The part of psychological rehabilitation, we're also in line with Calicon. But that is important for both black people and white people in Brazil. White people here also have pathologies, you know, but they're different, but very similar levels, you know. I actually believe that white people in Brazil have more psychological problems than black people. The psychological problem with black people in Brazil is actually is actually connected to crime, you know. While white people actually, it's actually a conversation about the military police here, where they're very aggressive towards black people. You know, it's actually another conversation that we need to have. Now we're going to talk about reparations and our talking and our transfer of technology and culture with the Caribbeans. I would like to emphasize that Brazil has technology, very good technology in every area of knowledge in the planet. Brazil has high technology in the nuclear area, for it be in any area in Brazil has has the ability to use every single area of nuclear power. Not only that power, but in every other area, you know.
Papel de protagonismo.
And in this technology, black people have a very special place, you know. The big problem is that Brazil is a country with lots of inequality. So lots have the benefit of this technology. However, others are excluded access to this technology. But black people, even though they are on top on many of these areas of technological areas, it's necessary for people in CARICOM, in conjunction with the black movement in Brazil, in order to articulate politically these transfers of technology, so that it can have benefits for both areas. It's a very important area. It's important for people in Brazil and the transfer of this technology in Brazil to the people in the Caribbean. And the other problem is the development of areas for indigenous people. The situation of native people in Brazil, it is very worrying. There's people here fighting for their lives, you know, because their areas, their lands are lands that are very rich with minerals. They're in constant danger, you know.
Para a sua terra ser utilizada. Então, o que ocorre?
So what happens is this. There is a plan from the government to try to destroy the native lands, you know, so they can explore it. Actually, the development of these areas, it's been very small through the time, you know. It's important an alliance between the Caribbean people, the Colombian people, with the indigenous people everywhere, and us, in order for us to support the development of native people. They are fighting not only for reparations, but the recognition as an ethnicity. Now I'd like to talk about, just to end what I'm talking about. It's important for the development of Pan-Africanism in the international context, in order to better our fight, you know, so all our people can come together. So after the 6th Congress, that happened in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. The main African leaders began the process talking about the work of people of Pan-Africanist leaders, and they ended the Congress talking about cooperation within Africans in order to develop African nations, unfortunately excluding all the other Pan-Africans, you know, excluding people outside Africa. You know, in reality, it is important. It's important for it to be clear that for this Congress of Pan-Africanism, they only had power of vote people that came from African people. So people that are actually from outside Africa could not actually have a voice within this Congress.
Que atua na França, e mais o Conselho
The Council of Representation of Black Associations in Paris. Those are representatives of more than 40 movements of reparations. They also pretend to ally of this idea of the new Pan-Africanism. It's important for us to have the support of Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. They've always been in front of this fight, you know. Trinidad and Tobago and Caribbean in general, and Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica are actually the leaders of the fight for Pan-Africanism. So the fight of reparations between people of African descendants everywhere, you know.
Do Caribe, essa luta.
This fight it's something that has to be together. We have to be fighting together in this new Pan-Africanism. So what George Perdman, Sylvester Williams, M. Ashwoods left us, and Claudia Junes, this heresy are not lost. You know, this what they fought for was not in vain. Now we need to be fighting for a new Pan-Africanism with the objective of reparations, so that we can better the life of all our people. And so to end, I'd like to say that first, the life of people is counted in decades, but the life of Africa is unending. Our life is in. Secondly, I'd like to say that in Brazil, the fight is complicated because in a very unequal place, but we have this seed of transformation. So we are here, and you can count on us within this fight. Someone asked a question here about what counsel, what can you say, what advice can you give about reparations?
Tá, eu passo para.
Okay. Can I answer the question? Okay. We believe a lot, especially on the young people of Brazil. It's in the intervention of young people in Brazil. If there is a bit of systemization, if there is political discipline, they are the key factors that will be able to take that fight forward. You know, we are preparing work, jobs, places, opportunities, projects, so we can share our experience through those 45 years. And from gradually, we are opening the way for our young people. It's important for them. They are the ones to take the fight for it.
Pode responder, a Marise pode fazer a resposta.
Então,
Marise, what's your reply? I agree with Ostapo. I believe in the young people. They're the future. It's something that I always say because there isn't how not to believe in the young people within this side, you know. Like when we see a young person that is been looking for this process of developing knowledge, you know, it's from there that I see that we can change, you know, here in Brazil, in America and in general. So it's through the young people, it's through them that the fight will carry on. The fight is historical. I believe that it's them that is going to make the big change. It's going to be by their hand that big change will be achieved. It's important for them to always to be looking back at the history and the experience that has been, what is being done before, what the fight that our previous generations fought, but it's them that have been actually putting forward lots of things that have been fighting for. So when Ostaco speaks about the movements, I think that the movement needs to have a political practice, you know. He speaks about an Africanism that is very thought about, that needs to have a political fight, you know. Without it, I don't think we'll have the structural change that we need and the structural difference that we actually fighting for. I think it's the young people that is responsible for real change.
Aí eu já respondo a pergunta, né, que era
and now answering the question, how do I see the engagement of universities so that we can walk towards this practice in, well, the universities, I still see it, universities, as a place of structural racism. That's why it's so important for us to be within the universities. That's why it's so important for people to have Black people in universities, Native people in universities. It's because it's exactly in order to put her history within those places, you know. It's something that we've been trying to do. We've been doing this. We've been doing this with. There is no organization like political way in order to people say that, oh, let's work about the Native American and Black people within universities. There's no organization to do that. That's what we've been doing because it's needed. It's not something that was organized for us to do. For example, a friend of mine from a rural university here, we need to kick down the door, you know? That's what we've been doing. We've been knocking on this door every time. And as we've been doing this, we're like imprinting our story, we've been imprinting our culture. So
há uma história e cultura africana e
the
afro-brasileira
history,
a partir de
our history in universities only happens because of the engagement, in most cases, by teachers and students that fight so that this story is actually learned. In reality now, it's actually a law, but even though the law exists, it's still not implemented within universities. It's that we're talking about before, how the laws are not actually put in place here in Brazil. So in reality, just to conclude, the university formation here in Brazil, having a basis hard history, comes from fights from teachers and students. For you people to have an idea, the bigger part, the majority of programs here, you're going, in most cases in university, sometimes you only find one Black professor here. For example, in my area where I teach in university, there's only 3 Black students. So I believe that the fight, institutional fight, only comes from this personal fight, you know, and the political fight that we've been trying to fight for. Since 2014, we have the law, which is the law of quotas, that says that a certain number of Black people and Native people have to have a place in universities, you know. However, there's lots of white people using this law in order to take those places that that are actually for Black people and Native people. So laws in Brazil are really hard, you know. It's not something that is followed. So our story only happens because our fight is big. You know, it's something that we've been doing.
Muito obrigado pela...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for what you guys said. I'm going to speak about what I think about this. Eustáquio, I really liked what you spoke, and Marizia as well. I think it was very clear. It was able for people to understand a little bit about how things work in Brazil and how complex it is when we're talking about reparations here. We've been speaking a lot about laws, right? And I'd like to remind people about the date here. Since the 1500s, it's been outlawed the slavery of Native Americans, but since the 19th century, until the 19th century, you could still find Native American slaves. And to this day, the lands of Native people have been explored. People have invaded it in order to explore minerals, in order to explore their land. You know, in perspective of the future, I believe in one thing: connections. There are some things that there are things that have been solved, you know, like for
né, de atos
example, when talking
afirmativos nas
about quotas
universidades.
or places for Native Americans and Black people within universities, but you know, in a whole, you know, we have 150 people, have 150,000 people that became had access to university thanks to the quotas. So it is something that is very important, something that wouldn't happen otherwise. For example, we actually managed to have, for the first time, to organize a congress of Black students, you know, university Black students. It's something that it's a big achievement, you know. It's actually a problem. The problem is that lots of people here that are Black people are there trying to work, trying to study, and they have that idea in mind that it's extremely hard to get in, you know. He can't think that as, I believe people can think, Black people here can think as that achievement of being there only as a personal achievement. It is actually a community, it's a community achievement, you know. There's a lot of Black people that are doing, that now have access to courses in university, you know.
Essas áreas médicas, entre outras, e que estão em pouco contato. Então, se a gente for parar para pensar sobre o futuro,
if we stop to think about the future,
o que está acontecendo com esses negros?
What is been happening to these Black people that are finally having access to this education? Like the ones that are going to become lawyers, the ones that are going to become doctors, the ones that are become military officers. Thanks to this law, this is going to be able to work. It's important for us to reach these people that are having this opportunity in order for us to have contact with us. I went to Trinidad and Tobago and I showed them like the project. What is my project? What is my life project? You know, to have an exchange, you know, so that we can learn more about each other in every area, in technology, in education, in health. It's important for us to dialogue. There's going to be Black people that are liberal. There are Black people that are not liberal, you know. It's important for us to talk to everyone, whether they are left or right wing.
Se a gente não achar que a gente teria essa diferença, a gente precisa trabalhar esses tipos
We need
de
to
diálogo.
understand that we have differences within us, and we need to be able to talk to each other even though we have those differences. So if I'm going to leave an advice, is, you know, try to make a connection stronger. It's important for us to be together so we can form a real nation. We live in a state that was constructed, that was built with laws that were genocidal and racist. If we're going to count on them,
diálogo, quem é superior?
We're doomed. We need to talk about, we need to dialogue with each other. You know? When you're talking to someone that thinks they're superior to you, you're not having a dialogue. You're submitting yourself to other people, and all they will give you back are crumbs. You know, small things that you look and you're like, this is not going to make any change. So we need to have more influence, more power. You know, and together we can achieve that. For example, imagine if people, that Black people from every area, for example, military officers that are black, that have been talking to lawyers that are black, that have been talking to quilombolas, that have been talking to other people with influence in Brazil that are also black. And they started to making those connections, and they started to talk about their influences. That is going to give us power.
Internacional, que é o meu caso, começa a fortalecer com o continente africano, com o Caribe, com outros.
And we start to, unify with people of Caribbean, of Africa, and that will start giving us more and more power, And then we can work with the complexity and the difference, and we'll be able to work and understand the differences. Of course, that in a moment can actually do some. They can have problems, but it's important for us to have these connections. We need to be talking to each other from the smallest area to the highest class of people. We need to the people from very low income need to be in contact with people that are like billionaires and black, So I believe that we need to connect more. That's the message that I'm going to leave. I totally agree with you.
Concordo integralmente.
I completely agree with you. That is the way that we need to take this.
Thank you so much, Alabê Nunjara, for the weekend of reflections on reparations with Eustáquio Laua and Marise Conceição. Thank you so much to our viewing audience for joining the Black Consciousness Festival. Stay tuned to our exciting schedule and get more information on the beautiful people around the world that are collaborating to make this weekend happen. And register for upcoming conversations at our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. Our conversations continue all weekend, and our schedule is online. Our next conversation today is at 6 p.m. Atlantic Time Zone and 7 p.m. Brasilia time. The title is Path to Progress, Reconciliation and Closure. Do join us. Thank you again, Alabê, Marise, and Eustáquio.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
you for you too.
Obrigado.
Espero que tenham gostado.
Ok. Obrigado.